Hello, and welcome to your weekly briefing for Global Conflict 1. In this video, I will be covering days 46 to 52, and as usual, attempting to best document the various political changes that occurred within this world within the aforementioned time frame. Starting off with House 2, their allies House 7 and House 12, they have officially declared war now on the House 19 alliance. So they're definitely involved in that war. House 15, however, and their allies House 18 have not. And this is really a point of interest to me because they are quite active over here in the Middle East and northern parts of Africa, even down towards the central parts of it. But they're currently fighting House 1. And House 1, as you can see, has lost a fair amount of land, but at the same time they are striking back over here and have taken a couple counties in Central America from House 15. So it doesn't seem to be that they're entirely disabled. That House 1 is interesting because it is led by a player named Dave 1, and if any of you have had any experience probably in the EU servers, you are most likely familiar with Dave 1. He has been around a long time, really, even before Europe, but he's a very dedicated player. However, he doesn't seem that he can formulate the best alliances. He will card them very quickly early on. In this world, he wasn't the quickest, but yeah, he has an alliance, a few friends at least that go with him, but they don't seem to be able to make great alliances, and they'll burn out maybe after a couple hundred days in the world. So it's a little bit, on one hand, I'm quite impressed by the fact that they are holding out as long as they have in House 1, but on the other hand, I think something has to break pretty soon. So if House 15 ends up getting caught up with this whole war against House 19, where would that put House 1? Well, House 1 has a couple of options. Either if they get beaten by House 15, they'll be a part of House 15, most likely, a sister house or an ally. If they hold out until House 19 comes for House 15 or vice versa, House 1 could use that to their advantage and ally with House 19 against House 15. And that would be optimal for them. They seem to be quite resilient, quite resistant to external pressures, so being able to make an alliance against their enemies would for them be good. But as of now, House 15 and 18 are still focusing a lot on House 1. They haven't started any other wars, and of course we're all familiar with House 15-18's past history with House 10. You know, if it wasn't for House 19, House 15 would probably already be at war with House 10, or it doesn't really matter which one declares war, but they don't like each other, and they never really have. The exact reasons I'm not sure about, but if it wasn't for these problems presented by House 19, House 10 would have probably favored House 15 as an enemy. And that brings us to a very interesting turn of events. Now, last week, House 10 was a war ally of House 9. If you recall correctly, House 10 declared war on House 19 after House 19 declared war on House 9. And when House 10 did this, they actually violated a non-aggressive pact that they had signed at the time with House 19. So, you know, they put a lot on the line to come and defend House 9. But there was one faction especially, Battletoads, that wasn't getting along with House 9. The Battletoads were formerly in House 10. They are now currently in House 16. So that goes to show they probably were a bit divisive on both sides. But what happened was that really drove the alliance apart was House 9 didn't think that House 10 was investing enough in the war, that they were just an ally in word but not in deed, essentially. And then House 9 at the time was also fighting House 11. And House 10 is very good. They're good friends with House 11. So House 10, while being allied with House 9 and fighting House 19, they didn't want to touch House 11, even though the House 9 players in the lower parts of Africa really sort of needed House 10's help to defeat House 11. So how the situation ended up escalating was during the peace talks between House 9, House 15, and House 19, allegedly House 10 was not invited to take part in those peace talks because House 19 wanted to focus on House 10. Apparently, despite declaring war on House 9, House 19 thinks that they've pretty much done everything to House 9 that they're going to do. So they want to focus on House 10 next. And House 10 were not, again, this is on hearsay. This is the information I'm getting. House 10 was not invited to those talks. So that really was a breach in trust that House 10 had with House 9. And it made it look like House 9 and House 15 were collaborating together. You know, House 15 is sort of an enemy of House 10, but they're not fighting. It made it look like House 9 and House 15 were working together against House 10 to try to make House 19 kill off House 10, which were looking like their enemies. So you really can't blame House 10 for being sort of irate at this happening. However, what proceeded to go down was House 10 formally declared House 11 a sister house. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because House 10 was hoping that House 9, once they saw that House 11 was House 10's sister house, they would finally make peace with House 11. Instead, both houses ended up going to war over House 11, essentially, is what, like I said, that's the straw that broke the camel's back, is when House 10 declared House 11 a sister house. So now you have House 10 and House 11 in one of the first real official alliances. They are sister houses now. They are going to be fighting House 9. And then this is interesting once again. I'm not sure if House 11 is fighting House 19, but House 10 still is. And they have made some pretty significant gains. I mean, they have Italy right now. And Bulgaria, I believe it is. I'm sorry, but there are so many countries in Europe, and I don't live in Europe. And to top that off, Firefly put all of their names in their localized language. So you got Greek in here, Romanian, languages that, I can tell that's Romania. So House 10 controls Romania, but I think that's Bulgaria there. And of course, Italy is controlled by House 10 now. So House 10 has definitely made advances against House 19 in Southern Europe, let's say. Southern, Eastern. The northern stuff, though, House 12 has lost. Well, it's interesting. They haven't exactly lost land. They have switched some of their land over to House 2, since House 12 and House 2 and House 7 are all basically the same house. That's not really land lost. So House 19 might have its work cut out for it here. But that gets into another interesting area of the game, and that is these sort of alliances that House 19 has versus these other houses. Now, House 19 is a largely Russian-speaking house. They communicate primarily in Russian, and they really love their leader, Spartak, 1987. Yeah, so they really have a lot of trust for this player. So it is, unlike these other houses, where their attacks might not be as coordinated, House 19 is calling all the shots for their super alliance, and all the factions, for the most part, all their sister houses fall in line. And that can be much stronger than having a couple of factions, each with their own ambitions, both targeting House 19. So in this case, we have House 10, the House 2 Alliance, and even House 17. All three of them now are attacking House 19, but they're led by three different House Marshals, and they're not taking orders from one single source. So there can easily be fallings out, as we saw with the deal that happened with House 9. If one feels that another isn't pulling the weight, or one house feels another is trying to screw it over by getting House 19 to focus on that house, there can be a lot more tension there. So I would have to say House 19 really has the strength of unity. That it's united by essentially the Russian language. And I know the Russian players, they seem to alienate in a lot of online games, other players against them. If you look at the rest of the world over, you will have players that geographically come from very diverse nations. They speak different languages. You have people coming from Germany, France, the UK, Southern Africa, of course Brazil, Mexico, all of these different countries, of course Spain and Portugal, and they all will sort of they'll integrate into the global pool, let's say. They will work together with other houses, and they sort of adopt English as the lectum frigus, I believe the term is for a global language. Russians don't do that as much. They really do stick to their own, and that causes people to, on one part, hate them for that, and then the other side respect them for that very national strength that those players can have. So it is both good and bad for them. It's bad in the sense that it really makes other players pretty much the world over hate them, and it's good in the fact that, well, they might have all this hate coming in, but at the same time they're so much more stronger for being united by language in that sense. So that's what you have going on with House 19, and of course House 19 is still ally or sister houses with House 5, House 8, and House 13. And I briefly touched on House 17 and what they are doing. House 17, of course, has lands in Africa, but their base, of course, is still in Australia, and they broke a non-aggressive pact to declare war on House 19 as well. You know, they had a non-aggressive pact going on until day 100, which they broke after, I believe it was House 19 started attacking House 4. And this is the interesting thing, is because it's sort of another alliance that was betrayed. House 4 is a sister house, or I should say was a sister house of House 17. So of course, you know, House 17 is going to come to their aid if House 19 started attacking. Unfortunately, what happened was House 4, the leadership, Zero Factor, their House Marshal, decided to strike out on their own. Maybe they didn't think House 17 was reacting fast enough, or maybe they thought that they would ultimately get squashed because their House Marshal attempted to broker peace with House 19 on their own, excluding once again, in this case it was House 17. So they officially broke the alliance with House 17. House 17 really doesn't want anything to do with them, and the worst part is House 19 came back and started attacking them anyway. So it seems to be a faceted thing. You know, there's a couple of players in House 4 maybe didn't get the message, maybe didn't want to stop fighting, so they attack some House 19, and House 19 says, okay, the peace deal is off, we're fighting you again. So it seems that now the only result of House 4 having struck out on its own, let's say, is that they're no longer allied with House 17, but they're still at war with House 19. So it looks pretty serious for House 4. I mean, if you look at the land they currently control, they control about as much as House 1, which is another independent house. House 20, I've often bemoaned the fact that they don't seem to make up their minds either, and that still seems to be the case. There were reports that they were allied with House 17, there were reports that they were allied with House 19, and now that House 17 and 19 are both fighting, it seems that House 20 just doesn't want anything to do with any of it, and they're trying to be as neutral as possible currently. So we'll see how that all works out. And focusing a little bit more now on House 9, of course their sister house, House 14, is just pretty much gone from the map. I don't see them anywhere. House 6 has really taken a beating over here in India. They've been pretty much chased out of there. And of course, while they did make peace with House 19, House 9 suffered some severe losses because of that. And now, of course, they're another war right back on it again. Now they're fighting House 10 and House 11, so they're still not at peace. And I think right now what they really need is time to recoup, because pretty soon they're going to become another minor faction or a minor player in this world. Like a small house that somebody's fighting, that they don't give up, but they're not a big player anymore. I mean, House 9 has really fallen since their original alliance, and at the same time, House 15 has really grown. It has taken over a fair chunk of lands there, as well as House 17. A lot of former House 9 stuff, and House 9, of course, lost, oh man, so much of Europe. It was terrible for them. But they recently did replace their House Marshal. House 9 was formerly headed up by the Codemaster, I believe it was, and they took in a different House Marshal who was former House 15, and House 10 took this as a further indicator that House 15 was really working an alliance between them and House 9 to the detriment of House 10. According to House 9, this isn't the case. It is simply the House Marshal that they've moved in is a player who played with a lot of their hardcore players back on one of the Europe servers. So, you know, try to present both sides of that story. As with most conflicts, both sides pretty much think they're right, and there'll be key differences that they can never agree on, it seems like. So I think in conclusion, I'll just give another brief recap of what we know, what the major diplomatic standings are currently. We have House 2 recently declared war on House 19. House 10 is at war with House 19, but they're also at war with House 9. House 15 is at war with House 1. House 9 is at war with House 10 and House 11. House 17 is at war with House 19. And House 4 is at war with House 19 as well, but they're independent now and on their own. And last but not least, we have House 3. I haven't mentioned them before because the amount of land they control is very minimal, but they used to be a fairly significant player. It seems that maybe their alliance with House 2 has mellowed out a bit. Once again, I would label them as an independent player on this map. There has been word that House 19 would like to take that house over. I could see that being the case given the fact that it is struggling to maintain a presence on the map. So apparently House 19 has aspirations on that house, has designs on it, and they would like to see more of their players into it. So in the future it could become a House 19 house, but that is only if House 19 manages to get enough of their players into it. As of now, I think it is safe to say that House 3 is still a neutral house, and more likely than not, a mere victim of most of the other conflicts between other houses. They seem to get torn up quite a bit. But I think that pretty much wraps up everything that's gone down in the past week. As always, if you have information, please do contact me in game. My name is David Spy, that is one word. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next week.
Stronghold Kingdoms. What will you fight for? Play now for free.